Return of the Mount Hua Sect. Chapter 277. I am the one who will become the sect leader of Mount Hua. A cold, stiffened face. Perhaps because he was thinner than when he was seen at the Zhongnam Mount Hua conference, but Jin Gumryung felt cold. His face, which always had arrogance slathered on it, appeared stiff as if it had layers of ice covering it. He seemed to be projecting his whole body just to show how alert and strong he was. Hyung. Baekchun looked at his brother with a complicated expression. His brother. And this was one of his goals. At one time, Jin Gumryung looked like an impenetrable wall for him, and a goal he had to someday overcome. But in just 3 years, the relationship had changed so much. Step. Jin Gumryung's gaze as he walked up to the sparring ring was trained on Baekchun. No, it was on Chongmyung to be more precise. Where are you looking? The opponent, who had climbed into the sparring circle, was waiting with displeasure and bluntly asked. But despite hearing that, Jin Gumryung didn't avert his eyes. He just stared at Chongmyung with eyes that looked both cold and hot. Look at me, now! Jin Gumryung didn't even turn his head to glance over, instead choosing to look around the crowd. Don't bother me, you little bastard. What? The Qingcheng sect's Wang Sangbo was called a little bastard. That is so arrogant. I will see if those words come from your mouth once you come close to my sword. Only then did Jin Gumryung look at his opponent, and he smiled in a twisted and terrifying manner. Wang Sangbo, who saw that smile, felt the hair on his body rise up, and he stepped back without even realizing it. Jin Gumryung then opened his lips. Let's check it. You! Don't worry, I will treat you right. Jin Gumryung turned to Chongmyung again. He smiled each time he looked at Chongmyung eating his mooncake cookies. I need to overcome you and climb up. I need to defeat everyone I meet here so that I may meet that devil once again. Wang Sangbo, who felt taken aback by Jin Gumryung's cold and creepy face, couldn't even answer and grabbed his sword. Gongcho frowned slightly, realizing that the atmosphere wasn't normal. How does a disciple from the Zhongnam sect have so much killing intent? It felt like a force that only the ghosts of war would have. Gongcho tried to ignore this creepy feeling. In any case, this wasn't a spar he could stop. Start! As the referee shouted the signal to start, he didn't step too far back like he had in the other matches and decided to remain reasonably close. In case of an emergency, he had to jump in and break them up. Jin Gumryung slowly drew his sword. Shh! The sound of the sword being pulled out was quite well known, yet this time it felt quite creepy. Wang Sangbo shook his shoulder at the feeling. Do well! The warriors of his sect, who felt that Wang Sangbo was in a bad condition, cheered for him. At that time, Wang Sangbo looked at them and nodded. Just as the body follows the mind follows the body. As he began to unfold his familiar sword technique, his suppressed heart began to beat normally. Do not be afraid. Even though his opponent was Jin Gumryung, it had already been 2 years since his reputation had collapsed. Isn't he the one whose name hadn't been heard since his defeat from Mount Hua's divine dragon? This year is when the world will be shaken. The fame from 2 years back was nothing but an illusion for people their age. What only mattered was their current skills. He tried to push away the creepy feeling that was sinking in and turned to face his opponent. Finally, he also raised his sword and aimed it at Jin Gumryung. I will teach you a few things. I have nothing to learn from you. Jin Gumryung lowered his sword. Because I won't lose to anyone. Wang Sangbo raised his sword to his face. Wang Sangbo, his face stiffened, raised his sword as there was no need to speak anymore, and he ran at Jin Gumryung. Have you ever seen a sea of petals? What did this mean? Wang Sangbo frowned. No matter how he looked at it, this didn't seem normal. I will show you. Jin Gumryung raised his sword and aimed it at his opponent. At the same time, the tip of Jin Gumryung's sword began to shake. Petals! Wang Sangbo saw it. White petals were blooming from his sword. 1 or 2 blooming flowers were rising into the air. Sword key! Did the Jungnam sect have such a sword key? But there was no more time to think. This was because the blooming petals flew at Wang Sangbo at once. Wang Sangbo gulped without realizing it. In an instant, everything before his eyes was covered in white petals. As he tried to retreat in shock, everything behind was filled with white petals too. Front and back, left and right. Everywhere he looked was petals, as if the world was filled with them. No! Realizing that he wouldn't be able to use anything more, Wang Sangbo clenched his teeth and swung his sword at the petals. But, kakang! The delicate and light petals deflected his sword as if they were made of steel. Wang Sangbo's eyes widened in shock. How? That moment, the petals flew for him at once. A terrible scream rang out. Wang Sangbo's body was hit with the petals of sword key. Enough! With a loud shout, a wind blew from somewhere and blew away the petals hitting Wang Sangbo. Wang Sangbo stumbled a couple of times and his eyes were losing focus. Thud. His blue robe was now stained with blood. This! Gongcho, who stopped to spar, looked at Jin Gumryung with anger. But the scolding came later. The priority right now was the wounded. Gongcho looked at the body of Wang Sangbo and bit his lips. Jin Gumryung, seeing this scene, smiled. You cannot be angry with only skin-deep wounds, right? Gongcho stared at Jin Gumryung with eyes full of anger. Jin Gumryung's killing intent was real, and his apathy toward his opponent who had long given up. However, as he had said, Wang Sangbo only suffered from cuts on his skin. The situation would have been different if Gongcho hadn't intervened, but this also wasn't enough to disqualify the man. Is the Jongnam sect going to act this way in loss too? Is there any need to even discuss defeat against such people? I am simply doing my best. Gongcho bit his lip, and Jin Gumryung smiled. The result? The winner of this spar is Jin Gumryung of the Jongnam sect. As the deceleration fell, everyone cheered. Gongcho's eyes frowned when saying it, but he couldn't blame the ones cheering. They couldn't see it from there, the cruelty this man had shown in this spar. Those who watched from afar could only see it as Jin Gumryung defeating his opponent with a splendid sword technique. Jin Gumryung, who calmly listened to the cheers, turned his head. There was, of course, the gaze of Chongmyung. Blade-like eyes. Chongmyung shrugged his shoulders with a smile. Yunjong, who was beside him, asked, He seems to be looking at you. Right. Don't you think he has gotten stronger since the last time we saw him? Yes, well... And you don't care? Me? Yunjong shook his head. It would be weird if this guy cared about Jin Gumryung. He was the one who wouldn't even care if the sect leader of the Jongnam sect came out. Chongmyung picked up another mooncake and threw it into his mouth. As he chewed the mooncake that had entered his mouth, he smiled. He's completely broken. Jin Gumryung's sword was twice as gorgeous and sharp as before. From the outside, it looked several times stronger than before. Only on the surface, though. This was only the result of chasing behind an illusion. The Jongnam sword was neither flashy nor sharp. A sword that guards justice with honesty. That was their sword. With a sword that only mimics the shell of manhua, the true strength of the original technique could only be pursued but could never be reached. As long as the Jungnam sect's martial arts had lost its original intention, the Jungnam sect had lost its light too. Thus, in the end, even one of the best sects would fail to keep its name, and the poison Chongmyung had planted seemingly stained them. A little sad. Of course, considering what the Jungnam sect had done to Mount Hua, even if he chewed the sect alive, his anger wouldn't be abated. However, seeing it all fall apart faster than expected, he felt a bit of remorse no matter how bright their extinction was. Where is your conscience, you bastard? If you aren't here, you don't get a say. Huh? Nothing. Chongmyung waved his hand lightly. He saw Jin Gumryong step down. It seems like he put some effort in, but... Chongmyung smiled and turned his head to the side. Even Dongryong wouldn't be able to win like that. Right, Dongryong? Baekchun jumped up and pushed his fists on both sides of Chongmyung's head. Sasuk! Sasuk! It is Sasuk! Sasuk! Ah! Dongryong's attacking people! Baekchun let out a deep sigh. As for the mistakes he had made in this life, the most fatal was giving his true name to Chongmyung. Chongmyung, who had escaped from Baekchun, rolled his eyes. You are ashamed of the name your parents gave you. Please, shut that mouth. Please. Baekchun sighed as he fell back. Head! Kwang! Tang Soso glanced at her opponent, who had fallen to the floor, and looked at Gongcho. The winner is Tang Soso. Mount Hua, Tang Soso wins. Wah! Mount Hua won again. I think I just heard a strange noise. Did she just break someone's head? No, you must have heard it wrong. Would a disciple say such a thing on stage? Right? But aren't the women disciples of Mount Hua really good? Earlier, the disciple called Yu Yisol completely smashed her opponent. Mount Hua seems to be the most radical one. Right? Tang Soso came out bravely and confidently and went to Yu Yisol and bowed. Sago, I've won. You did good. Sit down. Yes. Tang Soso quickly sat down in the seat next to Yu Yisol, and Yu Yisol started talking, not taking her eyes off the other spars. A gap to the side. Yes. When putting weight on your left foot, be conscious of your back. Yes, I will keep that in mind. Your Sahyungs are stronger than you, but you were chosen as a representative because of your possibilities for growth. If you fall early, your Sahyungs will have a hard time. Even if I die, I will win. Hearing that, Baekchun made an awkward expression. No, you don't have to go that far. You people. Oddly enough, it was difficult to intervene in their conversation, but it is really good. Of course, Tang Soso was the weakest among the disciples of Mount Hua who had come here. Among them who had stayed back on Mount Hua, there were those who were quite stronger than her. However, this wasn't just a place to prove one's strength. If such a thing was taken into consideration, then Yunjong and Jogul wouldn't have come either. There were many Baek disciples who would have done better than the two of them. Yet, these people were chosen because it was a chance to gain experience and was not meant to showcase the strength of Mount Hua. Although it was said that she had been training steadily while taking the pills from the Tang family, Tang Soso became as strong as the Chong disciples in just 6 months. And considering her growth, through it all, no one could put her down. This is why Hyunjong had asked Tang Soso to come here. Of course, compared to other disciples of Mount Hua, her victory was a bit difficult, but she had won, and that was what mattered. Sago, when I perform the 7 steps move, my toes do not move smoothly. Am I doing something wrong? It has to be the nodding. Try stepping to the side. Think of the floor as nothingness and step through it. Ah, I see. Seeing Tang Soso clinging to Yu Yisol's side and asking questions, Baekchun smiled slightly. This is a good thing. Thanks to Tang Soso's natural socialization, even Yu Yisol looked softer than before. It must be the case of them influencing each other and moving forward. So, I'm hungry. When do we eat? Ah, except for this one bastard. The first day had ended, and the second day of sparring had ended differently. The spars on the first day felt radical, while the second day seemed to focus on strong people who were like crouching tigers standing up and finally showing themselves. Nam Gong's Doe and Jin Gumryung of the Jungnam sect, Jin Hyun of Wudang, Hebei Peng's Doryang, and Peng Chosong showed great skills. If this goes on like this, isn't that the same as all of us heading to the finals? At Jogul's words, Yunjong smiled. Normally, it would be, is this how we win? Is that what you are saying? No, we will win this. At Jogul's response, Yunjong nodded. That is true. Be it a spirit or not, no one here could touch Chongmyung. They couldn't imagine that either. But don't be too arrogant, Baekchun said in a slightly low voice. We are challengers here. There is no guarantee about what happens in the spar. Perhaps there will be losses tomorrow. Everyone, try to keep that in your hearts. Yes, Sasuk. It was at that moment when Baekchun nodded his head. Knock. Someone knocked on the front door and Baekchun stood up. Sayong, No, I will go. Baekchun walked lightly to the door and opened it. Who is? Baekchun went silent. There were two people standing there, Jin Gumryung and Father. It was Jin Chobek, the elder of the Jongnam sect. Jin Chobek was staring at Baekchun with low eyes and said, Can we talk? Baekchun bit his lip before saying, Yes.